afternoon, and welcome to One Word, Five Questions, part of our series titled The Real Thomas Jefferson. I am your host, George Gorey, formerly a captain with the California Highway Patrol and currently a criminal investigator with the Alameda County District Attorney's Office in the San Francisco Bay Area. Dr. Holochuk is a professor of philosophy and history who taught at institutions such as the University of Pittsburgh, University of Michigan, Rowan University, and Rutgers University, Camden. He is author-editor of over 70 books and 400 published essays, formal and informal, on topics such as ethics, ancient philosophy, science, psychoanalysis, and critical thinking. His current research is on Thomas Jefferson. He is acknowledged by many scholars to be the world's foremost authority and has published over 300 essays, formal and informal, and has 30 books on Thomas Jefferson. He also writes about Ukraine. As we mentioned last week, Dr. Holochuk received an email from a frenzied viewer concerning Thomas Jefferson's alleged affair with Sally Hemings. I'm going to quote the viewer. It says the viewer, quote, "I recently found this account by Israel Jefferson in the Virginia Humanities Collection. Israel does state that Jefferson had intimate relations with Hemings. It seems pretty clear and convincing since Israel was around Jefferson a lot and worked in his private chambers at Monticello. This is a hugely disappointing to me, crushing actually. Why would Israel make this up? Do you have any information on his claim? And have you seen this account? Any insight is greatly appreciated," unquote. In today's show, we examine this published testimony and does it inculpate Jefferson of paternity, or is it mere and more hooey? And that being said, Colonel, just before we get started, I wanted to let everybody know that we are going to be starting a new Facebook page. It's going to be titled The Real Thomas Jefferson. The old one has been kind of controlled and nuked by the Facebook Gestapo and KGB. Thomas Jefferson bring him home to Monticello, unfortunately. So we're going to start a new one. We're going to post these videos and post our thoughts. And that's a project that's ongoing right now, which I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, and anyway, we invite our viewers and people who enjoy the show to participate and comment on the Facebook page as well. It's open for our viewers especially, so we can share our comments and you can make comments on our comments. So thank you for that.
Great.
My talk, I spoke on Putin in the Ukrainian war yesterday at the Warren Public Library, and we had about 70 people there. I was really impressed. This is the first time I spoke
Very
there.
Nice.
Yeah, it went well. So
Putin, the antithesis of Thomas Jefferson.
Yeah, that's right.
And the colonel is here today. He has his colonel's insignia on, as you can see. He is
right
large and in charge here.
Given to me by you, by the way. Thank you very much.
That's right. Well, I got to be outranked by somebody, right? You know, you're the colonel.
Well, formally, you're not outranked. You're informally outranked because you are really a captain. I'm not really a colonel, but I am a soi-disant colonel, which
I like that though.
In my own mind, it's just as good as anything else.
Yes, it is.
Having a little fun with it. That's all.
That's right. So let's get started. We're going to start with our questions here, and we'll start with question number one, which is pretty straightforward. Colonel, who was Israel Jefferson?
Well, I don't know. I need to answer that right now because I think as we go through his testimony published in the Pike County Republican, we're going to find out just who he was. And I think, given that the tendency is to take his testimony at face value without critical examination, I think the answer to that question is up for grabs, because I think I'm going to try to show that we can't take what he tells us here about his life at face value, because there are just too many falsities in it.
Okay, excellent. So let's go on to question number two. Before getting to Israel Jefferson, on Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings, are there any remarkable passages that tell us about the credibility of this source?
Yeah, and I want to begin with the credibility, because if he shows himself to be an incredible witness to events, there's no reason to take anything he says here, at face value. Now, I'm gonna read some of the things he says. This was printed in the Pike County Republican in Ohio as part of the third installment of Life Among the Lowly, perhaps a play on Beecher Stowe, Uncle Tom's Cabin, or something like that. And the Pike County Republican was a Republican newspaper, Republican at the time of his publication, 1873, was not Republican in the Jeffersonian sense. It was anti-Jefferson Republican. So Samuel Wetmore was the editor, and he comes up. The first one was the testimony of Madison Hemings. He comes up with this sock dolager once again, just going to knock you on your butt here by coming up with some stuff by someone who knew Thomas Jefferson. He wasn't probably all that popular figure in Ohio at the time, at least among the Republicans. He says, I was born at Monticello. This is Israel Gillette, who called himself after the death of Jefferson, Israel Jefferson. Why did he change his name? Well, if you were a slave for Thomas Jefferson, and slave often took their master's name. If your master was a former president of the United States, why the hell would you want to change your name? It's like saying, yep, I am Israel Jefferson. I worked for Thomas Jefferson. Can you beat that? Nanny, poo-poo, you did not. He says, I was born in Monticello in the seat of third president, seat of Thomas Jefferson, third president of the United States, December 25, Christmas Day in the morning. Right, so he's born just like Jesus Christ. The year, I suppose, was 1797. My earliest recollections are the exciting events attending the preparations of Mr. Jefferson and other members of his family on their removal to Washington, D.C., where he was to take upon himself the responsibilities of the executive of the United States for 4 years. Right. Then he writes, after Mr. Jefferson left his home to assume the duties of as president, all became quiet again at Monticello. He's reelected in 1804, took his seat in 1805 for the second term, and he closed on 1809, where he was succeeded by Madison. He goes, at that time, I was upward of 12 years of age. Okay, stop, and let's go to Thomas Jefferson's grandson, who read this account. It got to his attention, and he wrote a very scathing reply to Samuel Wetmore, which was never published. Well, why would you publish it anyway? But he says, I'm going to give you bits as we go on. He says, Israel is made to say that he recollects distinctly the departure of Mr. J and family for Washington, D.C. when he went to assume the duties of president. He's going by Jefferson's logbook. Mr. Jefferson left home alone, taking not even a servant with him, December 1st, 1800, to preside over the Senate as vice president, where he was March 5th, 1801. That's when he started the presidency. Israel, by the record, was born on December 28, 1800, not December 25, 1797. He is thus made to recollect events occurring nearly a month before his birth. It's pretty remarkable. Now, how do we know that? We go to Jefferson's farm book, his log, his garden and farm books, and we have here, right, you can't see it, but we have an account here where Jefferson logs in for the year 1810. He talks about where his slaves are. He gives a list of all of the slaves that are in his house, all the slaves that are on the farm, and slaves that are tradesmen and slaves that are on the farm at Monticello. And where does he list Israel? On the farm, not in the house. Nowhere in the book does he ever say he was in the house. He's always on the farm. And it gives his birth date as December 28, 1800, not 1797. So first off, why couldn't he have accessed the date of his birth when it was clearly there in Jefferson's records? All right, anyways, I was saying that he doesn't get his date of birth correct, and he certainly could have had access, not personally, but he could have had access through Thomas Jefferson for the exact day of his birth. And why does he get that incorrect? Is he posturing here to be able to give himself credibility as a witness to early events? Because even if he had been born in 1797, he would have been, for all intents, he would have been born in 1798. So he would have been 2 or 3 years old. What kind of memory recollections do 2 or 3-year-olds have? I don't have any memories from being that young. So, I mean, if he, as Jefferson's grandson says, he has a recollection from of events that occurred a month prior to his birth, which is pretty astonishing. Anyways, there's a second event when Jefferson, he says, Mr. Jefferson took his seat as president for the second term. I began the labors of life as a waiter at the family table. Again, he's talking about being in the house, a slave of the house, not a slave of the farm. We have no recollection in Jefferson's Garden and Farm Book anywhere that he is mentioned as a slave in the house. That was generally for the Hemings people and so forth. My brother Gilly, being older than I was, rode the near wheel horse. He was a postilion while I was mounted on the near leader. In course of time, Mr. Jefferson rode less ostentatiously, and the leaders were left off. But then one rider was needed. Sometimes my brother Gilly, other times it was me, blah, blah, blah. Okay, here is Jefferson's grandson replying. He says, he is made to say, and Thomas Jefferson Randolph says this on 5 occasions in his response. He is made to say, he is made to say, he's given to say. It's not that he says freely, and I'll try to explain why he says. He's made to say that he commenced the duties of life as a waiter at Monticello, an attendant on Mr. Jefferson's person at the commencement of his second term, March 1805. He was then the mature age of 4 years and his whole family on the list of slaves on the farm leased to Mr. Craven from 1801 to 1809. So you go back here and you look at I came off here. You look at all the slaves that were listed, right, in the farm book. You don't have, you have Isaac and his family. His mother was Jude, I don't remember. His father was Edward, his mother was Jane, I think. And you have them listed at Mr. Craven's from 1801 to 1809. All right. Now, does that look clear? Is there something, am I being blotted out?
It looks like there's something in the way, like a bug or something.
Oh, it is a fly. Okay, we'll just have to start again. I didn't even realize there was a fly in there. Okay, Thomas Jefferson Randolph says he was first brought to my notice as a scullion. Scullion is a servant to a cook or something like that. Scullion also means like a debased or degraded person or something like that. So if you're a cook's attendant, you're not much of a person. Again, we have no evidence whatsoever that he was in the house as a slave. And then he goes on to say, his grandson, he is made to say in an establishment where there was a superabundance of servants, he was called on, a mere boy, to discharge the duties of coachman, waiter, and attendant on his master's person, kindling his fires, etc. In other words, he got into Jefferson's room and Jefferson wanted him in his room. He goes on to say, Mr. Jefferson rose at dawn and always kindled his own fire. His confidential servant, Burwell Colbert, that's the person he allowed in his room, was the only one who placed his wood and water and had access to his room besides the person who cleaned it and made up his bed. And that wasn't Sally Hemings, by the way. And this was punctually done while Jefferson was at breakfast and making the round of his workshops and garden immediately after. Israel was never employed in any part of trust or confidence about the house of Monticello. So right off the bat, everything he wants to say about his position, he wants to say that he was close to Thomas Jefferson, that he was at Monticello as an attendant to Thomas Jefferson. His grandson refutes all of that. So right off the bat, we have evidence of him being an intimate of Thomas Jefferson, very much liked by Thomas Jefferson, to to make his story. For what reason? To make his story more plausible? I don't know. But his grandson refutes it all. It's all garbage. So we're off to a bad start already for Israel Gillette, who changed his name. And then changed his name to Jefferson. I think it was 1833 after Jefferson died. You could change your name.
Affiliated with the great man, right?
George Jefferson sounds a lot better than George Gorey, but you can change your name too and claim to be a descendant or of one of the slaves or a descendant of Thomas Jefferson. That might get you some out of police work. Who knows? I tried
get some notoriety, right?
Yeah.
And then the third question says, Israel tells a story about overhearing a story between Thomas Jefferson and Lafayette on slavery. Can you tell us about that? And what does Thomas Jefferson Randolph have to say about it?
Yeah, he as postilion, he's telling this story when Lafayette visits in 1824, 1825, and they were in a coach, and he was the on one of the horses. Israel was, And he says, on the occasion I'm now about to speak of, General Lafayette and George were seated in the carriage with him. Not you. The conversation turned to the condition of colored people, the slaves. He says, listen to this part. He says, Lafayette spoke English indifferently. By that, he means with difficulty, I think. Sometimes I could scarcely understand him, but on this occasion, my ears eagerly taking in every sound that proceeded from the venerable patriot's mouth. Right? So he goes on to talk about the conversation that they had, and Lafayette mentioned something that slavery is a bad thing, that people who call themselves liberators and liberal people who respect the liberty of all people should have slaves. And Lafayette did think that way. That's clear. And he has Jefferson say something like, yes, I hate the institution of slavery, but the time is not right to do anything about it. And that's consistent with what Thomas Jefferson could have said. But I take somewhat seriously what the grandson says. Again, his grandson says, Thomas Jefferson Randolph, he is made to relate a conversation between Jefferson and Lafayette a half century before, lying dormant in his mind during that period. So in other words, he's recalling something that he heard 50 years ago. One problem. People, when they recall things that happened 50 years ago, tend to make a lot of mistakes or tend to hear what they wanted to hear. Lying dormant in his mind during that period, never before having been known to mention it. So he never mentions it till now. Why is this the first time he mentions it? Lafayette, according to Israel's own admission, speaking with an accent that rendered it difficult for him to understand him. We go back to say that Lafayette often spoke with indifference and indifferently, which means by him with difficulty. The English language enunciation did not come easy. And he says, often hard to understand what he meant. Now, what the grandson says is that he's the postilion. He's on the horse. You've got the horse's hoofs, banging into the ground beneath them over sticks and stones and gravel and whatever. Then you've got the wheels of the carriage going over, making noise. And then directly behind him, you've got Jefferson speaking to Lafayette, and Lafayette speaking his English with difficulty. And for some strange reason, is that Israel understands everything that's going on this time. That seems a bit of a stretch. That said, the general tenor of the conversation they presumably had is very consistent with how the two thought about slavery. Did he actually hear the conversation through some miracle? Perhaps. I suspect he made up a lot of it. But again, it's a story consistent with the character of each of the two people. So
interesting. And then question number 4 says, what does Israel Jefferson say about Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson?
Yeah, this gets back to what one of our viewers, said. I found this account when I came upon it disturbing. And I want to say, knowing you and viewers knowing me, I'm not a Jeffersonian apologist, nor are you. In other words, we're not here to say, okay, we're going to find something that exonerates Jefferson, come what may. Right. And if it turns out that we find something that shows Jefferson had an affair with Sally Hemings, so be it. You just have to change your mind. So we're not here as apologists trying to help out our disturbed viewer who wants to make sure Jefferson didn't have an affair. I only say there's no evidence to believe that he did whatsoever. Nothing that's compelling in the least. So he writes, and this is Israel. I know that it was a general statement among the older servants at Monticello that Mr. Jefferson promised his wife on her deathbed that he would not marry again. That was only true. I also know that his servant, Sally Hemings, mother to my old friend and former companion at Monticello, Madison Hemings, was employed as his chambermaid, and that Mr. Jefferson was on the most intimate terms with her, that in fact she was his concubine. First off, she was never the chambermaid. Sally Hemings, no evidence whatsoever she was ever allowed by Thomas Jefferson into his room, right? We already discussed who that was. That was a particular close slave to Thomas Jefferson. It was Sally Hemings was not allowed into his room. Okay, and here's something I'm going to read slowly, and it destroys everything about the testimony of Israel Jefferson as confirmatory evidence of what Madison says. Because this, the concubinage of Jefferson and Sally Hemings, I know from my intimacy with both parties, i.e., with my intimacy with Thomas Jefferson and intimacy with Madison Hemings. And we've already found out there was not much intimacy with Thomas Jefferson. He made up the intimacy with Thomas Jefferson by saying he was very close and he worked in the house when he never did. He says he was on the farm at times when from 1801 to 1809, he was at a different location. So he has intimacy with both parties. It's not true. When Madison Hemings declares that he is a natural son of Thomas Jefferson, the author of Declaration of Independence, and that his brothers Beverly and Eston and sister Harriet are of the same parentage, I can, listen to this carefully, I can as conscientiously confirm his statement as any other fact which I believe from circumstances but do not know positively. I mean, there's a fact that I know. I believe it from circumstances, but I don't positively know it. What he's basically saying is, yeah, I read Madison Hemings' testimony and I agree with it. Do I know anything about it? No, but I am firm in my belief that he had sex with Sally Hemings and she was his concubine, right? Because of Madison's testimony. In other words, everything we know about the testimony of Israel Jefferson concerning Jefferson's parentage rests on Madison's testimony. And I've already shown in numerous shows, right, we'll probably do that again, that Madison's testimony was severely flawed as well. Okay, and let's see what his grandson says. I'm not going to read all this. Israel is made to revive and confirm his own knowledge of a calumny generated in the hotbed of party malice. He's referring to Calendar. Mr. Jefferson and his daughter with their large family occupied the same wing of the building, the private access to their apartment ever contiguous. Every member of this family repelled with indignation this calumny. And he goes on to say, Mr. J did not liberate this woman, which is true. Sally Hemings was never freed, another falsehood, and her family, as Israel's made to state. To my knowledge and the statements other gentlemen made to me 60 years ago, the paternity of those persons was met by two other persons. He's going to talk about the Carr brothers and so forth. So the idea that there was a relationship, he's going to say, is a conjuration of James Calendar and so forth. And he goes on to say that the people who were in the house were the descendants of Betty Hemings, Sally Hemings among them. She was in the house. There's no question about that. Hemings family were slaves dear to Jefferson's wife. Sally Hemings was Jefferson's wife's half-sister that we know today, or it seems very, very plausible at least. And he goes on to say, Israel was not one of this family. He was not of the Hemings. It was a source of bitter, bitter jealousy to the other slaves who were always anxious to sign for any reason but the true one, very superior intelligence, capacity, fidelity to trust. Basically, he's trying to say Israel was not one of the Hemings, and he's trying to act like one of the Hemings. He was jealous. And all the other slaves who were on the farm and not in the household, to be a household slave is to have an elevated status, right? And basically, he changes his name to Jefferson to elevate his own status. Surprised he doesn't say Jefferson was my father. You never know, right? So, yeah, that's all I'm going to say about that question. I mean, he has more to say, but for the most part, there is every reason to think that there was a bitter pill for Israel Gillette to swallow, that he was not invited in the house. So he makes up this story that he was intimate with Thomas Jefferson. He was intimate, probably was not even intimate with Madison Hemings, right? Because Hemings would have been Madison would have been of a superior status in the rank of the slaves because he was a person of the household. So, again, Thomas Jefferson Randolph writes this reproach, writes this response to the third installment of these Life Among the Lowly features in the Pike County Republican to refute the calumny. And at the end, he says, look, can't we just have peace already? So his grandson, we have to do a show on the grandson at some point. You
I
tell me
agree.
what
I
you
think he's a great topic.
and I never did much with his grandson, and that's the shame. So remind me to do that, and we'll do that. Maybe next week we're doing something different. You'll tell us about that. Let's go on to the last question. That's all I have on this.
So the last question is, how have the rumors published in the 1873 piece been used by modern detractors of Thomas Jefferson in our era, particularly the works of, Peter Onuf and Annette Gordon Reed?
Yeah, I don't own any of Annette Gordon Reed's books. I refuse to buy them. When I need recourse to them, I go to the local library because they're readily available. Someone asked me questions about her. What about, after I was speaking, what about Annette Gordon Reed's great stuff? And I said, well, I don't think much of her great stuff. I think it all comes from Fallen Brody without any attribution given. And I leave it at that. I think very little of what Gordon Reed has said. But for the most part, people like Onuf and Monticello especially treats Israel's account as more. They talk about the mountain of evidence in favor confirming a relationship. I wrote a book on this and showed there's no mountain of evidence. There are zero firsthand testimonies that show there was a relationship. There are four direct testimonies that argue against the relationship. So how can there be a mountain of evidence? If anything, there's a mountain of evidence suggesting there was no relationship. They don't say that. But they keep using this over and over again. I call it the consilience argument. So much evidence points in the direction of a relationship, nothing against it. Absolutely false. And they continue this crap. So they keep talking about this as additional confirmatory evidence, right? Confirmatory evidence for an hypothesis. If I say all limes are bitter, there are no sweet limes. No limes are sweet. And so I imagine I've sampled from different lime trees, thousands of limes in my life, and I've never tasted a sweet lime. So and I take a sample from another tree and it's sour again. So I have additional confirmatory evidence. In this case, I do. Their use of confirmatory evidence is very, very greasy. It's just, anything like this, there is zero here that points to. Basically saying it's confirmatory evidence because it's additional evidence. But when we read the last sentence that we read, my testimony just comes from Madison's testimony. In other words, he's saying zero. So they treat it as additional confirmatory evidence. And that leads us to, I guess, what we're doing next week, right? That's kind of a nice segue.
Yeah, yeah. And I was going to just add one thing is that I've been in police work a long time, and you deal with evidence, right? I know that you can't just make a simplistic legal argument against paternity with Jefferson because I know that Mr. Hyland's book does that. You have to go beyond that. But that being said, everything here is rumors, conjecture, and hearsay, and it wouldn't be believed in a court of law, or it would be accepted. And it's just interesting how it's now these types of things that wouldn't be accepted are now elevated to like the gospel truth.
All right. So before you want to tell us about
spin.
next week, we have a couple. I have to ask you a question about your methodology as a detective. You're not an inspector, and of course you're a captain. So you've analyzed probably hundreds and hundreds of cases. Are you Clouseau? Are you Sherlock Holmes? Are you Columbo? Are you out of all the people? Tell us why.
Shucks.
Tell us why.
I like the Columbo method, right? Because when you interview people, right, that are criminals or people that are committed crimes, much of the time they think they're smarter than you are. And a lot of them have a disordered mind. That's why they're criminals. I don't mean some of them are mentally ill, but I don't mean it like that they're all that way, but they always are trying to get over. So if you play dumb, you'd be shocked. Well, you probably wouldn't be shocked. I mean, you're a well-researched person. The average person will be shocked at what people will tell you. And they will lead themselves right down the primrose path.
So that you bait them.
You just say, well, they'll tell me about that. People love to talk. And then nowadays you have the added issue of social media where people post on social media the crimes they've committed, which is really unbelievable that you would do that.
And I got to delete all my stuff. So now that you just said that, so before it gets to the
but it's true though. I find, all those ones, Clouseau, Sherlock Holmes, they all have their great tactics, but I found Columbo to be one of the best because he gets people when you watch the show, he gets people to think that he's this dumb detective with a cigar in his mouth. and he's actually not dumb at all.
Oh, it was a cool show. Yeah. I mean, there's so many detective shows and movies in the 30s and 40s. Detective movies were really, really high. I love to watch them. The Thin Man too, kind of
Oh
fun.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
oh yeah.
Anyways, okay, what are we doing next week?
So next week's going to be a really great show. Next week, we're going to take a look at Monticello's webpage, run by the Thomas Jefferson Foundation, once the Thomas Jefferson Memorial Foundation. It is now the world's most important source and a valued source of information on Thomas Jefferson. Yet when it comes to the avowed relationship of Jefferson and Sally Hemings, the webpage gives us a heinously biased description of Jefferson. While the evidence is at worst inconclusive and at best indicative that Jefferson had no interest or involvement with Hemings, Monticello continues to assert that the relationship is factual. So next week, I, the captain, and the colonel will point our analytic magnifying glass on the Thomas Jefferson Foundation's webpage, which I'm looking forward to this.
I am too. I mean, you're going to do your own analysis. I'm going to do my own analysis. We're going to come at it like two different detectives. I'm an analytic philosopher. You're an analytic policeman, officer, who a captain, and now investigator. So see what we can come up with for next week. That should be fun. All right, Captain. Thank you again for
Thank you,
for your
sir.
help and for very poignant and astute questions. And we'll do this again next week.
All right, Colonel.
TTFN.
We'll see you next week. TTFN.
That's right.